Hi guys, this is Prasid Banerjee from Digit.in. So what we're doing today is we're looking at four phones which are all priced under rupees 10,000 and they all have the Android KitKat OS on them. So what we're going to do is try to give you a comparison of the build quality and display and a little bit about the performance and battery of the phones to help you, to decide which one is better. There's actually very little to separate these phones. So we're gonna try and give you as good overlook of them as possible. So we have today the Lava Iris X1, the Karbonn S99. This is also a KitKat run phone. The Moto E, Motorola's Moto E smartphone, and the Micromax Unite 2. So of course, the Moto E is the best known out of all of these, most probably. But let's start with probably the build of each of the phones. So we'll start with the Moto E since it is the best known out of all of these. So if you look at the Moto E, I'm sure you guys have looked at this phone before, had this phone probably even in your hand. So the Moto E, right at the offset, it's a little thick. It's pretty thick. It's 12.3 mm in thickness, which is quite thick. But and also the phone is a little heavy. But that being said, it's not like very heavy. It's not like you can not keep this in your pocket or carry it in a bag. It's pretty compact. The phone, it's just a 4.3-inch display. So that way, it's not a very big device. Fits right into your hand and pocket. For an under 10K phone, this phone has actually sold a lot till now, so you already know about it. Also, around the same size is the Karbonn S99. The S99 has a 4-inch screen, so that is a little smaller than the Moto E. So basically, you understand the screen size. When we talk about the screen size, it's the diagonal length of the screen. So this is a 4-inch screen. Although the phone itself, if you look at these two side by side, you will see that the Karbonn S99 itself is a little bigger than the Moto E. But the Karbonn S99 is again thinner than the Moto E. If you look at this, the sides of the phone, this phone is much thinner than the Moto E. So the Moto E is 12.3 mm in thickness and the Karbonn S99 is around 8 to 9 mm, which is thinner than the Moto E. Also, the Karbonn S99 is much lighter than the Moto E. The Moto E weighs 142 grams. The S99 is lighter than that. So if you are a fan of a light phone, this is a better choice in a way. But we again have two more phones here. So if many of us like a bigger screen. So when you come talk about a bigger screen, you have the Lava Iris X1 and the Unite 2. Now both of these have 4.5-inch screens. So actually the Unite 2 has a 4.7-inch screen. So that is a little bigger than the Lava Iris X1. But the Lava Iris X1, you can see it looks a lot like the Apple iPhone. Lava has been doing this. The build, the looks wise, this is probably the best looking out of all of the four devices that we have here. But so the Lava Iris X1 has a 4.5-inch screen, and the Micromax, this is the Micromax Unite 2, it has a 4.7-inch screen. So these two, there's very little to differentiate between them. You can look at the build quality. They're both little fingerprint intensive on the front, but on the back they're not that intensive. You won't have that problem with this. Here, just talking about the build, the Iris X1 is just very slightly lighter than the Unite 2. In most occasions, you won't even feel the difference, but the Iris X1 feels much more compact than the Unite 2. If you look at them together, you can see that the Unite 2 is just very slightly bigger than the Iris X1. So build wise, maybe if you want a bigger screen but a more compact design, a more sleek design, then this is the much sleeker of the two. But the Unite 2 on the other hand looks a little slab-like. If you can see properly, this looks slab-like. Lava's design is much better. So out of the four phones that we have here, looking at the build and design, the Iris X1 probably has the best design out of all of them. It's got a very sleek body. It's a plastic finish, but it's got this small metalish uh, lining on the side. which gives it a even better look. We have the white color here, it's also available in black. So it's got the grill here and another speaker here, it's got the front camera here. So you can see this is a much sleeker design than any of the four phones you have here. So now talking about the display on these phones, we have them all on for you. Right at the offset, you can see that both the Unite 2 and the Karbonn S99, these two phones are brighter than the other two. Having said that, brightness doesn't always decide whether your screen is better, of course. So the Moto E, since we started with the Moto E the last time, the Moto E here has a capacitive display. It's got a 540 into 960 pixel resolution. On the other hand, the Karbonn phone, the S99, this one has a similar resolution, but it's a little brighter than the Moto E. If you put two of them together, this one's a little brighter. The Karbonn S99 is somewhat brighter than the Moto E. The bigger phones, the two bigger phones, the Lava Iris X1, this has a, like we said before, it's got a 4.5-inch screen, but this is an IPS LCD screen. So that is a better quality screen than these two. On the other hand, the Unite 2 also has a IPS LCD. Here again, the Unite 2 is brighter than the Iris X1. You can see that the Unite 2 feels a little more brighter than the Iris X1 here. So again, display wise, if brightness matters to you, the Unite 2 is the brightest out of all of these. But if you just simply looking at the display, I personally like the Iris X1 and the Moto E. I like these two displays the best, but it's really a matter of choice. If we say let's look at a few images on these and see what the difference in the display can come out to be. So you see, we're looking at the same image on both of these. The Moto G screen, the display is not that fingerprint intensive, and the Moto E screen, I'm sorry, is not that fingerprint intensive, but this one is, which actually affects this display, the quality of the display and what you will get in sunlight and indoors, and that will be affected because of it. On the other hand, out of all the phones we have here, the Moto E has a Corning Gorilla Glass 3 protective covering on the display. So this means this display is harder to damage. Also, one thing that the Corning Gorilla Glass 3 does is it gives you a difference in the touch. The feel that you get from the touch is quite different in the Moto E. It's much more premium, it's much more smooth as compared to the Karbonn S99 or the Lava Iris X1 or even the Unite 2 for that matter. The Moto E feels the best. So display wise, it really depends on what kind of quality you're looking for. If you're a fan of the brightness, a more bright screen which gives you much more vibrant colors, then probably the Unite 2 is giving you the best vibrant colors and the most brightness out of these. The Moto E is the sturdiest out of these, and the Iris X1, build wise, again the screen looks much better better than the others. And last, although the Karbonn screen is bright, it just, I don't think personally, it doesn't make the cut for me. So another thing that we look at when we buy a phone is the performance. So performance, of course, we have to talk about the processor here. So starting with the Lava Iris X1, this one has a 1.2 gigahertz quad-core processor, but it's a Broadcom 23550 processor. The Karbonn S99 has a 1.3 gigahertz MediaTek processor. The Moto E, on the other hand, the Moto E has a 1.2 gigahertz dual-core Snapdragon 200 processor. So it's the Qualcomm Snapdragon 200 processor. It's also got the Adreno 302 GPU from Qualcomm. The Micromax Unite 2, this one has a MediaTek MT6582 processor. It's clocked at 1.3 gigahertz. also a quad-core processor. This one also has the Mali 400 GPU, Mali 400 MP2 GPU. So if performance-wise, all these phones are quite close to each other. The Moto E has a micro SD card that can be attached to it, as do the others. So when it comes to performance, there's not much separating these phones, except there are benchmarks that we can test. What we usually do in sub 10K phones is you're not looking to play a very high-end games or do a lot of multitasking on this. With the GPUs in them, they will allow you games. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and play Subway Surfer on a few of these phones and see what kind of performance we get. So this is probably, Subway Surfer is probably the most popular out of the most simple games that we get on the Play Store today. We're not, of course, going to play something like a Dead Trigger or Asphalt on these phones, because that won't help you. So as you can see in the Moto E, what happens here is the phone isn't giving you some very different performance. I'll most probably be getting that out of these phones as well in while playing Subway Surfer. But the difference here is that because of that Corning Gorilla Glass 3 layering on the phone, what I'm getting is a much different feel when I touch it. So that somehow personally I prefer that. I like that because it gives the phone a little more premium feel than the others. But again, that you may want to not use that as well. So next we'll try the same game on the Micromax Unite 2. Here the performance again is pretty much the same, but the Corning Gorilla Glass, the lack of that Gorilla Glass 3 layering makes a difference in the touch, in the feel of the touch. So that is the only thing separating, say, this phone than that. Although the bigger screen that I get here, this again, like I said before, this is a 4.7-inch screen. So the bigger screen does make a difference because it's easier. The screen is bigger, it's easier to play. On the other hand, if I'm using it single-handedly in a different game, this might be a problem because it's a bigger screen. The Moto E is much more compact, which means it's much easier to use with just one hand. On the Karbonn S99, there are no lags per se in the game, but the Karbonn actually, there's something with the screens, the way the screen is set, the way the screen has been designed, the display has been designed actually, not the screen. So the game doesn't quite look very good on this, while it did on both the Unite 2 and the Moto E. Gorilla Glass 3 is not present on this phone either, but I had much more fun playing this same game on the Moto E and the Gorilla Glass, and the Unite 2. So the Iris X1, this one, like I said before, build wise, this is the best out of all of these. Looks wise actually, not build wise. Looks wise, this is the best out of all of these. So it's I'm hoping this one will give me good performance and I'll probably like it better. So again, there's not much difference when it comes to Subway Surfer. There's not much separating it from the others. The touch is a difference, but the experience here is better than the Karbonn phone or the Micromax phone. The Moto E, again, I would be bent towards the Moto E just because of that Gorilla Glass presence in it. So like we said, there's not much separating these phones in terms of the performance. If you're playing simple games, the Moto E gives you a little better because of the Gorilla Glass 3 presence on it. But again, you cannot really decide between these phones based on the performance. So another thing that we look at, if you're buying an under 10K phone, you would really want it to perform well on the battery front, right? I'm sure the battery is a big problem in all Android phones, but today, especially after the Moto E, under 10K phones have started performing better on battery. So the Moto E, as you already know, this one is supposedly giving you a full day's battery, which actually it does. It does give you a full day's battery. The Lava Iris X1, this also gives you good battery, but you will probably have to charge it at least once in a day. Same goes for the Unite 2. And these two phones, you will have to charge both of these phones at least once, twice in a day actually, not once. So that ways the Moto E is performing better. The Karbonn S99 actually is below all of these. It has the worst battery life. Right now it's at 57%. It's not really been put through a lot to drop to 57%. It has been under full brightness till now, and before this we had put it through a 1 hour long video. That's about all there is to it. So battery wise, the Moto E did perform better than all of the others here. So the only thing now you can look at to decide between these phones is, we have told you about the display, we have told you about the build, and we have told you a little bit about the performance as well, and the battery. So the only thing left is the price of the phones. So the Moto E, as you know, this one costs rupees 6999, as does the Micromax Unite 2. This is also priced at rupees 6999. The Iris X1 on the other hand is a little more expensive. It costs around rupees 7900. So a little more expensive. Karbonn's phone is actually cheapest amongst all of these. This is rupees 6490, and that is Karbonn's own pricing. On Flipkart or say another e-commerce portal, you can get this for less than 6000 actually, around 5700 or something like that. So price wise, this is the cheapest of all of these four phones. But if you look at value for money, then I would probably spend that extra 1000 just to go for the Moto E, or even the Iris X1 for that matter. Again, the Iris X1 uh, is more expensive than all the others here. But if you're looking for a very sleek design, if you want your phone to not look like badly built phone, then the Iris X1 makes much more sense than the others. It's very light and it's got a very good design. So the decision, of course, is at the end yours, but price wise, I think the most value for money phone here is still the Moto E. But the while the Iris X1 has a better build, the Unite 2 has a better screen in a way. Not exactly better, a brighter screen in a way. So that's about all we can say about these phones, and we hope it helped you.